In the immediate aftermath of September 11th, a deep cultural trauma rippled across the globe. Out of that shock and confusion emerged a loud, unapologetic intellectual response, a movement that came to be known as New Atheism. Leading the charge was Christopher Hitchens, a famously contrarian journalist who quickly became the movement's chief polemicist. His style was aggressive and uncompromising, a relentless intellectual assault that his critics would eventually dub sledgehammer rhetoric. He channeled this aggression into his 2007 book, God is Not Great. Hitchens drew on his first-hand reporting from conflict zones like Beirut to argue a single, unyielding thesis. Religion actively poisons everything it touches and sits at the root of the world's most violent conflicts. For an audience still reeling from global terrorism, this totalizing takedown of faith offered a clear, definitive villain. People were angry, and Hitchens provided an articulate, highly confident voice for that anger. The book was an immediate commercial sensation. It shot to #1 on the New York Times bestseller list, and the popular press enthusiastically declared it the best piece of atheist writing since Bertrand Russell's essays from the 1920s. But while the public was buying copies by the millions, subject matter experts were having a very different reaction. Historians, theologians, and even fellow atheist academics started publishing their own reviews of the text. They expected to find rigorous logic and careful argumentation. Instead, they experienced profound cognitive dissonance. The experts found a manuscript crammed with basic factual errors, historical blurs, and glaring omissions, which presents us with an interesting intellectual mystery. Did Christopher Hitchens actually dismantle millennia of religious thought, or did his masterful prose simply make it sound like he did? To understand the backlash, look at how Hitchens constructed his arguments. His primary tactic relied on the straw man fallacy, bypassing a sturdy argument for a flimsy proxy. He selected extreme cults or fringe offshoots to represent global religion, condemning them in the strongest terms. While he spent pages savaging these fringe elements, he entirely omitted the centuries of rigorous natural theology produced by mainstream thinkers. The robust foundational philosophical proofs laid out by figures like Thomas Aquinas are completely absent from his text. The danger of this rhetorical tactic is that it creates an illusion of victory. Defeating the weakest, most ignorant version of an opponent's argument does absolutely nothing to invalidate their strongest intellectual foundations. This tendency to blur details frustrated scholars across the board. The Orthodox theologian David Bentley Hart pointed out that Hitchens confused basic historical timelines, carelessly conflating the specific events of the First and Fourth Crusades as if they were interchangeable. Hitchens also painted religious believers as inherently submissive to totalitarianism. To make this point, he claimed that people of faith largely supported, or entirely failed to oppose, the rise of Nazism in Germany. Historians immediately flagged this as a severe misrepresentation. They pointed to the Barmen Declaration of 1934, a primary historical document written by German theologians that fiercely and unequivocally opposed Hitler specifically on religious grounds. Or consider the case of Dietrich Bonhoeffer, a prominent Protestant pastor who actively conspired to dismantle the Nazi regime. Amidst hundreds of pages condemning religious complicity, Hitchens dedicated exactly one sentence to Bonhoeffer's resistance. Rather than adjusting his thesis to reflect the complexity of historical reality, Hitchens actively curated his anecdotes. He spotlighted the vices that supported his claims and simply ignored the virtues that contradicted them. A second major pillar of the book is the assertion that religion is purely anti-science. Hitchens frames faith as being inherently hostile to rational inquiry and the scientific method. Yet respected sociologists and historians like Rodney Stark present a completely different historical record. They argue that the scientific revolution of the 16th century was actually birthed within a distinctly Christian framework. The early pioneers of modern science were propelled by a specific theological worldview. Because they believed in a rational creator, they deemed nature to be good, logical, non-divine, and completely discoverable through human investigation. Scholars point out a fascinating irony here. Early scientists assumed that a coherent, mathematically knowable universe was proof of a rational designer. Modern atheism, by contrast, must accept the fact that mindless matter accidentally produced reasoning minds as a brute, inexplicable given. This lack of rigor bothered secular thinkers and fellow atheists just as much as it did religious academics. The atheist critic Curtis White went so far as to label Hitchens's methodology as intellectually shameful. White's specific grievance was that Hitchens took thousands of years of deeply complex religious thought, textual scholarship, and human history, and reduced it all to a cherry-picked series of criminal anecdotes. The ultimate verdict from the academic community was clear. God is Not Great is not a work of careful, objective scholarship. It is, in the words of one reviewer, a rollicking burlesque, a masterful, highly entertaining piece of polemical theater. Today, the enduring legacy of Hitchens's text lies primarily in its rhetorical power, rather than its factual accuracy or its philosophical depth. The sledgehammer prose is undeniable. Hitchens wrote with a fierce, elegant anger that deeply satisfied readers looking for absolute certainty. But underneath that beautiful, combative language lies a highly brittle, frequently inaccurate intellectual foundation. It leaves us with a vital mandate for how we consume information. We have to learn to actively separate the style of an argument from its substance, and remember that just because a point is delivered beautifully doesn't mean it is actually true.